One of the most controversial theories about the ancient world is that the elites of various civilizations have been biologically of Northern European descent. This theory is controversial because it is felt to undermine the ethnic heritage of many peoples of the world. The reason why is because they feel that if their ancestors didn't build the civilization that they identify with, then this undermines their identity. The issue is that this theory about the origins of much of the world's civilizations is actually true. Truth should not have to modify itself for the sake of the feelings of the various peoples of the world who feel like they have had their heritage undermined by scholars. Instead, the truth should prevail regardless of people's feelings, and people should build their own identities based on real history as opposed to fanciful fabrications that give them a false sense of pride. That said, it's time we go over the true history as well as the evidence for why so many civilizations rose up in the first place. The mystery of why a whole wave of civilizations started to rise up from the dust and sand of the Near East is because of something that was happening so very far away, on the open steppe. There was a group of people that modern scholars like to call Indo-Europeans, but they called themselves the Aryans, or Arya, or any number of variations of pronunciation. They were a steppe warrior people whose culture was built on cattle raiding and fighting, and worshipping the gods of nature and the god of the sky, Deus Pater, the Sky Father. There was what I believe to be a revolution against the Longhouse society of tribal elders and matriarchal elders who most likely preceded them. This revolution of the wolf cult and its explosive results subsequently led to this new culture conquering in several directions. Some went west and created a new life for themselves, conquering the Longhouse of the old Europeans. Some went south and conquered the remains of the Dravidian civilization of the Indus Valley, while others conquered into the Middle East and enslaved the local populations and built all of the civilizations of the Near East. From Mesopotamia, Egypt, Persia, and even India, the ancient Aryan tribes conquered all over the ancient world and built all of the civilizations of that epoch, with ancient China seemingly being the only exception. This then leads to the evidence for Nordicism, as well as for the Indo-European migrations. In the 19th century, it was believed by anthropologists that there was a race of pastoralists from the steppe region, who they referred to as the Indo-Europeans or Aryans. It became doubted that they were really an ethnic group from the steppe region because of post-war academics trying to debunk the whole story of the Indo-European migrations because it was seen as too quote-unquote colonialist. It became doubted that they really were an ethnic group from the steppe region. It became the norm after World War II to say that the Indo-Europeans were simply a language group, not tied to any ethnic group, and that it was a purely peaceful spread of languages, something which no one has ever seen before, and that they were not a united warlike ethnic group that conquered its way across Europe, India, and the Near East, and parts of Asia. But instead, it was promoted that the prehistoric world was largely made up of peaceful hunter-gatherer groups. This is clearly not just more than the myth of the noble savage at work here, as well as the frantic effort to erase any trace of racialist thinking from all areas of academia after World War II, but now we have DNA evidence for the Indo-European migrations. In the scholarly article titled Massive Migration from the Steppe Was a Source for Indo-European Languages in Europe by Wolfgang Hack and Joseph Lazaridis, this article is from 2015, and it made a big splash at the time, and it is continuing to make a big splash because it essentially proves, using DNA evidence from ancient graves and archaeological remains, that the DNA of Europe changed significantly with the arrival of a new population of warrior nomad pastoralists approximately 5,000 years ago. This change could not have been because of the peaceful movement of languages. The reason why is because it is an absurd notion to begin with, because in known history, there has never been a peaceful movement of languages anyhow. Whenever a whole population starts speaking a new language, it's always because of colonialism. Every time. The reason why they called them Indo-Europeans is because they noticed that all of the languages from Europe to India were related to each other. Therefore, Indo-European was coined. The name Aryan comes from the different peoples who were all a part of this larger family of peoples, who called themselves some variation of Aryan. In Persia, they referred to themselves as Aryan explicitly, and many Persians do so to this day. An ancient example would be the funerary epitaph found on the DNA inscription of the tomb of Darius the Great, which says, quote, "I am Darius the Great King, King of Kings, King of countries containing all kinds of men, King in this great earth far and wide, son of Hystaspes, an Achaemenid, a Persian, son of a Persian, an Aryan, having Aryan lineage." End quote. Other examples of ancient literary evidence can be found in the Rig Veda, the most ancient document from Vedic India, which says, quote, "With these discomfit hosts that fight against us and check the opponent's wrath, thyself uninjured, with these chase all our foes to every quarter, subdue the tribes of Dasas to the area." End quote. Rig Veda, Book 6, Hymn 25, Verse 2. Ralph T. H. Griffith translation. Another quote from the Rig Veda, which is very telling, is one that explains what the ancient Arya actually looked like. Quote unquote, thou, when praised by men who sacrificed of old, hadst pleasure in their lands, O Indra golden-haired." End quote. Rig Veda, Book 10, Hymn 96, Verse 5. Another interesting ancient example of ancient Aryans, or Indo-Europeans, as they are sometimes called, comes from Egypt, where archaeologists have found time and time again mummies of pharaohs, queens, and other elites who have either red hair or blonde hair. This is always ignored or downplayed for obvious reasons, but now there are even DNA tests that have been done on these mummies, such as Pharaoh Tutankhamun, who, according to a study done by Igenia, had 70% Western European DNA and 30% Semitic DNA. This is evidence that ancient Egyptian elites were far more related to modern Europeans than to modern Middle Easterners. But this does not tell the whole story, because the truth is that Egypt's racial history is actually incredibly complicated. According to Stevens Kuhn Carlton, in his book The Races of Europe, page number 98, quote, "The pigmentation of the Egyptians was usually a brunette white. In the conventional figures, the men are represented as red, the women often as lighter, and even white, although the hair is almost inevitably black or dark brown, and the eyes brown. Queen Hetep Heres II of the 4th dynasty, the daughter of Cheops, the builder of the Great Pyramid, is shown in the colored bas-reliefs of her tomb to have been a definite blonde. Her hair is painted a bright yellow, stippled with fine red horizontal lines, and her skin is white. This is the earliest known evidence of blondism in the world. Later Egyptian reliefs, however, frequently represented Libyans as blonde, and in early Egyptian times, the territory of the Libyans extended to the delta itself." End quote. In addition to this, James Henry Breasted, who wrote the book A History of Egypt from the Earliest Times to the Persian Conquest, describes the decline of Egypt occurring when they were overwhelmed by other groups, especially Nubians from the south, and that this eventually led to the decline of Egyptian civilization. According to an article on ScienceAlert.com titled "A Digital Dissection of Egypt's Greatest Pharaoh Reveals Striking Features" by Carly Casella, explains that there is archaeological evidence of Ramses the Great having red hair. It seems that when the Egyptians started out, the elites were mostly Nordic, and the commoners were mostly Mediterranean. Ancient Mediterranean peoples were more similar to Basques than to modern-day Mediterranean peoples. They were the descendants of the early European farmers that archaeologists talk about. It seems that Egypt declined because the Egyptian aristocracy were eventually mixed out with other groups and went extinct. Unless you count the Copts, who are in fact their last surviving descendants. A far cry from the glory of who they once were. Much like the Mayans or the Greeks, who are also examples of peoples who have withered and declined, but did not go completely extinct, but instead became shadows of who their ancestors once were, because of genetic shifts which changed the nature of their culture forever. When looking at the ethnic group in modern-day Egypt called the Copts, it is worth noting that there have been genetic studies which show that they are in fact the direct descendants of the ancient Egyptians, and these same genetic studies show that they are on average about 70% Caucasian and 30% Semitic. This is according to the study titled Northeast African Genomic Variation Shaped by the Continuity of Indigenous Groups and Eurasian Migrations, edited by Sarah A. Tishkoff. This is strange because it contradicts what is usually told by academia, which is that modern Arab Egyptians are the descendants of the ancient Egyptians, or sometimes they will even make Afrocentric claims about who the Egyptians were and what they actually looked like. But the truth can be seen in the DNA results, as well as the mummies they find, and also in the ancient written descriptions from the time. It's also worth noting that while Sumerian is a Semitic language, it is the names of their gods that are Indo-European. Names like Anu, Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag, which suggests that early Mesopotamia too had an Indo-European influence on it as well, probably following the same pattern as the others, that being nomadic warrior tribes came and conquered the Semitic peoples of early Mesopotamia and founded a religion and society that would become known as Mesopotamian civilization. The overall picture we get is that ancient Aryan tribes came down from the steppe and replaced the peoples of old Europe and founded the civilizations of India and the Near East. And when they did this, it was done on the basis of racial caste systems, which degenerated over time through gradual mixing with the lower castes. There's still a lot more to say about Greece, Rome, hunter-gatherers, and pastoralist peoples, but I'll save that for a part 2 to this video. Bye for now.